All right, guys, what's going on? Welcome back to the Everything College Football Podcast. Today I'll be doing my 2022 Mountain West Conference predictions. There'll be timestamps below if you'd like to skip around, as I'll lightly touch on every single team. Kicking things off, though, in the Mountain Division, I have Air Force claiming the crown on this side of the conference. You know, they get 70% of production back on this unit. That was the top rushing attack in college football last season, 327 yards per game on the ground. Top four rushers are back. Brad Roberts, 1,357 yards and 13 touchdowns at fullback, or running back, rather. Hazik Daniels, he's the quarterback, 736 and 11 touchdowns. You know, getting your quarterback back in this triple option offense is incredibly important. They understand the principles, and they're good at making decisions. So if you have a good quarterback in the system, it allows you to thrive. That's why Navy's kind of struggled the last few years. They've kind of lacked that. Air Force has not lacked that last season. They obviously will be pretty stout this year. They both had 4.5 yards per carry, though. DeAndre Hughes, he's 5'8", 170, full of explosiveness. I believe he's a former wide receiver. They convert him to a running back. Just shy of 500 yards last year. He had 3 touchdowns, 8.1 yards per carry, showcasing that speed. And then Emmanuel Michael at fullback, 5'10", 210, 427, and 3 scores on the ground. You know, mix that with 3 returning starters on the O-line. This is great news for this offense. They do get Micah Davis back as well, wide receiver. Brendan Lewis departs. But they always seem to have that one guy that wins deep downfield. That's the only time they have a passing attack is with plays downfield. 22 yards per catch for Davis. So he's going to be next up there. Defense loses some important pieces. Still a very stiff unit, though. You know, 19.8 points per game last fall. 299.5 yards per game allowed. You know, numbers always a little bit skewed of how this offense operates. They love to hog the clock, and the defense is not on the field a whole lot. But they only allowed 400-plus yards twice. They got smoked versus Utah State in September, a game they were leading in, and they actually ended up blowing that. A big lead in that game as well. That was early on in the year, and then in the bowl game against Louisville late in the season, that ACC program. So this defense is very good last year. You get safety Trey Taylor back, second on the team with 62 tackles. Outside linebacker Vince Sanford, 17.5 tackles for loss, 9.5 sacks. Those are absurd numbers. And then defensive tackle Chris Herrera. You know, those are 3 standouts for me. Overall, this is a tough, disciplined unit. I think one of the things to focus on, though, only 10 turnovers for Air Force, but 9 came in games decided by 10 points or less. So obviously they want to cut down some turnovers in these close ball games, and that's going to allow them to win more games and to be able to close out opponents more smoothly, because that was a big problem for them last year. Runner-up in the mountain, Boise State, 29.2 points per game for this offense. No balance, though. You know, the run game's been quite poor the last few seasons, only 120 yards per game running last fall. You know, George Holani, 569 and 1 score. He's back. Ashton Janney, a 3-star back from Texas. He's going to look to get some looks as well, because they need to add a different dimension to this running game, because things have just not worked the last few years, and explosiveness has been a big reason why. Maybe Janney can provide that for him. Hank Bachmer, though, he's back at quarterback. 3K yards, 20-8 TD to INT ratio for him. 256 yards per game through the air. You know, he's always been a good, tough quarterback, like Bachmer. Biggest problem is he loses 3 of his top 4 pass catchers. You know, Stephon Cobbs, he's next up. He's going to be a star for them. 34 receptions, 421 yards, and 5 touchdowns for Cobbs. Davis Cutter, you know, Dirk's son, the longtime NFL coach, he'll need to step up. Not much returning production at wide receiver. You know, that's a big problem for this football team. Is when I was looking at the numbers and at the depth chart, I did not see a lot of proven commodities there, wide receivers. So that's going to be an issue. O-line has struggled. That's evident of how poor the running game has been. 4 seniors are back up front, though, so that should allow them to progress, at least a little bit. And I don't know how much it will allow them to thrive, but I think the offense will be a tad bit better just because they're getting that continuity back up front. The defense, though, they get back 8 starters, 19 points per game allowed last fall, only 12 pass touchdowns allowed, and they got 13 picks. So that's a great work from the secondary. They allowed only 206 yards per game. Safety J.L. Skinner, 92 tackles, 8 tackles for loss. He had 2 picks. He did a little bit of everything for them last year. Markel Reed, he was a guy I was watching last fall, 21 tackles in 5 games before he got hurt. He's back, so that's big news for them. I like this front 7. Scott Matlock, he was a standout defensive tackle last season. He was a player I circled before 2021. Ended up being a good player for them with 7 sacks. Dimitri Washington off the edge. They're looking for him on pass rush. You know, he was a contributor, but they are looking for him to hit the quarterback more often than not. You know, Isaiah Bagna, he was stout in that position for them. 7 tackles for loss, 6 sacks. Very tough schedule, though, for Boise State. I do think this team will compete. Number 3 in the division, Utah State, the reigning conference champions. You know, I do think that the top 3 guys are not very split apart. I think either of these 3 can win the conference, not just the division. It's going to come down to those games, though, where they all play each other, so they'll all have their opportunities. Utah State, though, 3rd. Logan Bonner's back, one of the top quarterbacks, not just in the group of 5, but in the country. 32.6 points per game. He's tough as nails. 3,600-plus yards, 36 touchdowns, and 12 picks. So we want to see him cut down on the turnovers a little bit this year. They lose the top 3 pass catchers, though. Justin McGriff, he was 4th on the team with 35 receptions to 414 yards and 6 touchdowns. So he's going to be a big breakout star for them in this offense. They add 3 transfers at wide receiver. Xavier Williams from Alabama, Brian Cobbs from Maryland heading the bunch. So passing attack, we'll see what happens, but these guys are clearly talented if they were at those schools and they come over to help Bonner out. Nice backfield. Calvin Tyler, 911 yards, 7 touchdowns. They pick up Jordan Wilmore, while John Gentry, the third leading rusher, is also back. 145 yards per game on the ground for this team, 3.6 yards per carry. Isn't ideal. It's pretty good for how this offense operates, though. And 4 starters are back in an offensive line that was such a poor unit last season, especially against the pass rush of other opponents. So, it was a very sluggish area for Utah State. So I want to see them progress in that area for sure. Defense was great down the stretch. They held the last 5 opponents to under 20 points. The run defense was still shaky despite 113 tackles for loss, which was one of the nation's best marks. Byron Vaughn's back at defensive end. 10.5 tackles for loss for him. Patrick Joyner had 7.5 of his own. Defensive line has good depth and production. They add 3 transfers as well. That's going to help things out. Justin Rice, though, he's a big loss at linebacker. He much like Bonner, followed Anderson over to Utah State, and those guys were both high impactful transfers for this football team. He departs. A.J. Von Pafchan at linebacker. He's literally the only notable veteran in the middle. He had 55 tackles last year. They add 4 transfers to that position, though, so we'll see if some of that veteran leadership can step up this fall. Secondary was good. They did allow 3,200 yards, but kept everything in front of them for the most part. Opposite of the run defense that was just really getting torn up for most of the year. These guys kept everything in front of them. Hunter Reynolds as safety. He was a standout, 83 tackles. His dance partner is Shaq Bond departs, but they add Gervin Hall from Miami to occupy that. So I think this defense is a solid unit because the defensive line, they're deep, they're nasty, they get into the backfield, but stopping the run was still a big issue, and now they lose some guys at linebacker. So I'm not sure what will happen with the run defense. I don't really expect them to progress too much, but maybe the D-line will start to be more commanding. We'll see what happens. Utah State third for me, just because the defense is a bit of a question mark, and offensive production departing is kind of a iffy area too. Number 4, Colorado State. Jay Norvell moves over from Nevada to Colorado State, makes that in-conference move, which you never see. He does it here. 8 transfers here on offense. Clay Millen follows over from Nevada, as does wide receiver Troy Horton. Melquan Stovall, they mix that in with Ty McCullough, who had 415 yards and 17 yards per catch last season. The running game improved last year, 164 yards per game on the ground. Ajon Vivens takes over. He's third on the team with 324 yards. We'll see what happens there. They had 4 transfers on what was a pretty sluggish O-line, though. 2 of them come from Nevada, so I think this offense, with the newly implemented air raid and some familiar faces, really start to take shape. I think they're going to make some big strides compared to last year. Obviously, the scheme change, it'll be interesting to see what happens, but they already bring guys that were in it over, so I think that's a great move. You've seen Bailey Zappi and Jarrett Stearns last year. Western Kentucky did that. They followed over Zach Kitley from the FCS school. These guys all reunited somewhere else, and they thrived. So I think you'll see that here at Colorado State. You won't see like 6,000 yards or anything, but I think this the chemistry these guys already have in place, it's not going to change even though they go to a different school. I think the offense will be a pretty surprising unit this season for a lot of people. The defense was quite poor, though, on both fronts, allowed nearly 29 points per game as a whole. Top 3 tacklers are back for another senior season, though. Cameron Carter, 100 tackles, 7.5 tackles for loss, 6 sacks. I like Dequan Jackson as well. He had 8.5 tackles for loss and 84 stops. And then nickelback Tywan Francis, 88 tackles of his own. And then safety Jack Howell was a pleasant freshman surprise last season. So they got some playmakers here. The pass rush was quite good, too. Mohamed Kamara was second best pass rusher last fall. He had 7.5 sacks. And then Devin Phillips gives them some size on the interior D-line. They add 5 transfers on defense, 4 in the secondary. I think this team overall is going to be a solid unit because they got some of those guys back on defense. I love the transfers. They follow Norvell over here for the Rams. I think this offense is going to make some waves this fall. We'll see what happens with Colorado State. That's really been kind of lacking the last couple of years. Trey McBride's obviously a big departure, but so fresh faces here for this ball club, and I think they're going to do very well this season. Coming in at number 5, Wyoming. It's going to be tough for Craig Bohl's team to make the postseason once again, but Andrew Peasley comes over from Utah State to alleviate the pressure of this quarterback room after they lose Levi Williams and Sean Chambers. And he's a really good runner. He's got some speed. That's what they had kind of last year, too, with those guys. Joshua Cobbs, he will emerge as a new number 1 at wide receiver. He's third on the team with 245 yards. Tight end Trayton Welch, he had 163 and 2 scores. That's the only really, proven guys at wide receiver. This wasn't a great passing attack last year. They made their money on the ground. And Titus Sween, he's back, second on the team with 785 yards and 7 scores. Complete makeover, though, for a running game that averaged 211 yards last year. Only 1 starter's back on the O-line. So there's going to be regression in all areas, it seems like, on this offense for Wyoming. They had a handful of guys transfer to Power 5 programs, so some big losses there, but it's nice to see them get some opportunities. Valladay to Arizona State and New York to Texas, even though he just tore his ACL. So prayer for him, but they're clearly producing guys that are talented. they end up elsewhere with some better opportunities. The defense, though, as well. Only 37% are back on defense. Linebacker Easton Gibbs is one of them. 90 tackles, 7 tackles for loss. A few NFL guys here at linebacker. Chad Mulma also had Logan Wilson a couple years back. So this has been a strong suit position for Bull in his defense. Cole Godbout at nose tackle, 70 tackles, 7 tackles for loss, and 5 sacks. From his position, that's some really good numbers. So I like that production from him. Daron Harrell, safety Miles Williams, joined by 3 sophomores in the secondary. Harrell's a Wisconsin transfer. This was the Mountain West's best pass defense last year. 190 yards per game allowed through the air. Struggled a bit in the last 2 games, but during the year, they were rock solid. Utah State and Fresno State were both held in check tremendously. Under 53% of passes were completed, and both quarterbacks were held to under 200 yards versus, those were the 2 top quarterbacks in the conference. Logan Bonner and Jake Haener. They held them in check. That was no fluke one bit. They earned that in Wyoming. They were really good in the secondary. I think they're going to take a big step back this year on both sides, but this is a team that plays hard. They're a very good bunch, so I think this will be fun to watch Wyoming this fall, try to put the pieces together. Rounding things out in the Mountain Division, New Mexico, not much here, 12.2 points per game on offense, 234 yards per game, obviously not great numbers one bit. Kansas transfer Miles Kendrick comes over to try and give them a spark. Bobby Wooten, he had 47 rushing yards last year. That's the highest returning rusher from last fall. Nathaniel Jones, though, he did have 232 and 4 scores in 2020. Didn't play last year. We'll see what those guys can do. 120 rush yards per game overall for the offense. So they weren't awful, but, it's obviously still not great. Luke Weissong, he's the leading wide receiver from a season ago. 23 receptions for 228 yards. 7 starters are back on defense that, improved quite tremendously. 28.4 points per game, 363 yards per game, 5.3 yards per play allowed. Those are all increases from the years prior, so those are certainly encouraging. Linebacker Cyree Riley, he was good for them. Safety Tavion Combs, 81 tackles, 2 picks, and 5 pass breakups from Jake. Salatostal, 4.5 tackles for loss for him. 7 starters back on a defense that improved tremendously last year. That's certainly encouraging. The offense, I'm not sure where the hope is for them. I couldn't even find 3 good players to put on this PowerPoint because I'm not really sure. They play at LSU. It's going to be a beat down there. Fresno and Air Force, they got Boise as well. So a pretty tough schedule. I don't expect much from this team, but the defense is certainly something to watch for you Mountain West junkies. Looking at the West Division, I have Fresno State claiming the crown on this side of things. A big chunk of the offense is back. Jeff Tedford is as well. He replaces Kalen DeBoer, who departs for Washington. Jake Haener briefly flirted with the transfer portal, but he comes back a resilient quarterback. He showed that in the UCLA game last year where they were down late in that fourth quarter, and he didn't give up, and he kept taking shot after shot. 4K plus yards, 33-9 TD to INT ratio. Now, this is a guy I was circling coming into the year because he had a great 2020. And he just shocked everybody with his play. I was very impressed with what he was able to do because this is a former high-end recruit. I believe he transferred from Washington, briefly considered going back, but this is a former high-end recruit. He had a great season, so I expected big things out of him, and man, did he deliver. Gets back his top 2 pass catchers as well. Jalen Cropper, 899 and 11 scores. Josh Kelly, 778 yards. Only 3 scores, but he had 52 receptions, so that's a good yards per catch number. Nico Ramingo from California comes over. Not much returning production outside of that duo. And then the new ad from the Golden Bears. The ground game complimented them quite well last year. Jordan Mims is back for one more year. He's been around forever, it seems. 700-plus yards and 6 touchdowns for him. 3 starters are back up front. The O-line was pretty bad in pass protection, so that's something I want to circle to see them progress on. The defense, though, only 20.5 points per game allowed last fall. 7 starters are back. Defensive line isn't as dominant as last year with some big losses, but defensive end David Pearls, he's back, 13.5 tackles for loss. 3 fumbles and 7 sacks. Matt Lawson was good. Leonard Payne, he's 6'3", 315. Those are 2 seniors on the interior D-line. They also added 2 transfers as well. So I think the depth is certainly still there. We'll see if playmaking can be up to par, though. Malachi Langley, 61 stops. Lavelle Bailey had 56 tackles and 8 tackles for loss at linebacker. So they got some veteran experience there in the front 7. I think these guys are going to continue to progress. Evan Williams at safety, 92 tackles, 3 picks, 6 pass breakups. Absurd numbers from him. They're going to love having him back. Elijah Gates as well at safety. He was pretty solid. 52.1% opponent completion rate. That led the nation. They got hammered versus Nevada through the air, but 222 yards per game on the year. Completing balls was tough against this defense. They certainly lived up to that expectation throughout the year. Again, that was a nation-high opponent completion rate allowed. Coming in second, San Diego State. Only 3 starters are back on offense. It was quite stagnant last year. 2 of them are on the offensive line. And then wide receiver Jesse Matthews, who shined in that bowl game. He had 57 receptions, 642 yards, 9 scores. By far led the team in everything in terms of receiving production. Came off the heels of 230-plus yard games. Other than that, he was pretty quiet throughout the year, mainly because of the nature of this offense. Only 168 pass yards per game. Would like to see Tyrell Shavers get involved, the former high-end JUCO guy who was at Mississippi State. Braxton Burgmeister transfers in, though. Dual-threat guy whose legs might be able to provide a spark for, typically a very one-dimensional offense. Last year didn't have much of any dimensions, but I think Burmeister coming in, it's going to be interesting to see what Brady Hoke does because they've never really had a guy like that. They had a guy like Logan Johnson last year who, came from Georgia Tech in the triple option, but didn't provide them much at all. Chance Bell, Jordan Bird take over the backfield. Bell had 341 and 3 scores as a number 2. He's going to have, after 4.7 yards per carry last season, you have a big role to fill here because this is a team that loves to get big production out of their running backs. Chance Bell is next up, replacing Greg Bell. Somehow they scored 27 points per game. 341 yards per game is not a good number one bit. So I want to see them improve tremendously on offense, but the philosophy I think might have to change. Maybe Burmeister will be the reason why it does if, in fact, they have more success this fall. Brady Hoke's defense expected to head the charge once again. Defensive end Jonah Tavai, 14 tackles for loss, 8.5 sacks, followed up by Keyshawn Banks off the other side, 11 tackles for loss and 6.5 sacks. He also had 13 QB hurries. 2 great defensive linemen here. Cam Thomas, of course, departs for the NFL. He was a high-end pick. Caden McDonald, he's going to have to step up at linebacker. Michael Showcraft, these guys both had 49-plus tackles last season, so some experience there. McDonald, I do expect him to be a breakout star. Secondary really struggled. They didn't get great play from the corners. Covering downfield was an issue. 95th in pass defense nationally. They lose their top 2 DBs, but Patrick Morris, he's the safety for them. Team high 90 tackles and 4 picks. He had 9 pass breakups as well. He was a phenomenal playmaker all around. So getting him back is very, very crucial. I think his defense will be as elite as it was last year. Maybe a step back or 2 in some categories. But, as always, San Diego State and Brady Hoke, these guys really have things going. Looking at third, San Jose State. 2 of the Nevada transfer wide receivers end up here to join Chevin Cordero, who comes over from Hawaii to captain this offense. Elijah Cooks and Justin Lockhart are those guys. Cordero, dual-threat quarterback from Hawaii, 6,100-plus career passing yards, 45 touchdowns over the last 2 years. He had a really great solid career, I'd say, at Hawaii. 1K rushing and 13 touchdowns as well in his career. So he's had some really good numbers, some experience to bring to the table as he replaces Nick Starkel. Isaiah Hamilton's going to be paired up with those transfers. Second on the team in recs and yards last year at 31 grabs for 452 yards. An impressive passing game. It should rebound after a struggle last year, and I think it'll be pretty good this season. They shined in 2020, just wasn't the same after departure of some top receivers for Nick Starkel this past fall. Only 1 starter back on an offensive line. It was quite impressive last year, though. Career Robertson, 3. He was the 3rd leading rusher last year for this team, 280 yards. The defense also took a sizable step backwards, and it was kind of disappointing. 26.5 points per game allowed, 371 yards per game is still a good number, but Cade Hall, 1 defensive player of the year in the conference in 2020, only 6 tackles for loss and 4 sacks this past season, so I want to see him get back to his form. Vilami Fiocco, these guys form a great pass rushing duo, 12 tackles for loss, 7 sacks, and 3 fumbles. They also had 6 pass breakups. This guy was phenomenal, Fiocco, for them last season, all those numbers he put up. They're going to be joined by one of the nation's top tacklers and linebacker, Kyle Harmon. He had 135 stops. Senior Jordan Cobbs joins him as well. So pretty strong front 7. I want to see them, be more enforceful than they were last season because they weren't they didn't perform the way I thought they should have. The secondary wasn't awful. They did get smoked late in the year by the Mountain West's best passing attacks, like 3 in a row. They had those tough opponents like Nevada, Utah State, Fresno State at the end of the year. They just got hammered. Naheem Sheldon, 10 pass breakups, 2 picks, and 61 tackles. He was a breakout for them. See if he can anchor this secondary that has 3 seniors, Trey Jenkins and Trey White being the others. Nevada, this team's going to be in a lot of hurt this year. Jay Norvell departs for Colorado State, of course. Ken Wilson, though, comes over from Oregon after being in a defensive assistant role last fall for them. They lose everyone on offense. They all transfer out or went to the NFL, lose a few transfers to Colorado State. Wide receivers hammered, offensive line, lost a quarterback or 2, really. 15 transfers on offense, though, are added. Only 1 starter back on the offensive line that had 45 sacks last fall. That was 126th in FBS, so that's obviously a major concern. Shane Illingworth will battle with Nate Cox for the starting job. Running back Toa Tiua, 732 and 6 scores. He's going to be a focal point for them because he's really one of the only notable guys back on this unit. Top 8 wide receivers depart in terms of yards last year. Jamal Bell was, he's pegged to be a starter this fall, and he was 9th last year on the team in receptions. He's back, though. Offensive fall-off is going to be tremendous. We'll see how much Ken Wilson can do to uplift it. But, yeah, they're really in a hurt because they lose so much, even from the offensive line, who was pretty bad last year. So it's going to be an uphill battle for Wilson and crew. Defense isn't kind of in the same boat, though. Don Peterson's back. He's been around forever, it seems. 10 tackles for loss. An impressive D-line from last year undergoes a makeover. James Hanson and William Green, though, they both transfer in. They add some size. They're both 300-plus pounds. New faces at linebacker led by Elijah Winston. USC transfer is probably the most notable. I do see 5 starters in the secondary that are seniors. Experience is a plus there. Safety Tyson Williams, He's kind of the lead guy there. 47 stops, 3 picks, 5 pass breakups for him. So we'll see what happens with Nevada. I have them going 4th. This is not a really good division, though. I think they could definitely be a 2 or 3 win team, really. If how much they lose, that's certainly possible. UNLV Rebels, 20.8 points per game last fall on offense. The offensive line gave up 40-plus sacks, but they get back 4 starters, so that's encouraging. Kyle Williams had 42 grabs for 601 yards. He's going to be paired up with Ricky White. He brings some speed over from Michigan State. So they have 2 solid options here at wide receiver. Also, I have a handful of guys at quarterback, though. Cam Farrell had a 6-11 TD-INT ratio. That's awful. 62% comp rate for him. 178 pass yards per game, though. That's not the worst of numbers. Doug Brumfield only played in 3 games, though. He's likely the starter. He was second on the team with 109 yards and 2 touchdowns. And that's in only 3 games he played. So, obviously, outside of Williams, they didn't do a lot on the ground in terms of splitting it up. He was a complete workhorse. Charles Williams was for them. I think he had 1,200-plus yards. Courtney Reese, Chad Magar, both on the team last year, are back. No returning production in the run game, though, even though they have those guys coming on. Defense gave up 33 points per game last fall, 6.2 yards per play. They're ranked 10th in the Mountain West in run defense, last in the conference in passing defense efficiency. They allowed almost 70% comp rate on the season. That's obviously a pretty poor number. They also lose Jacoby Wyndham. He was their top linebacker. He's off to Michigan State. Adam Plant, though, 7.5 tackles for loss from his defensive end position. And Brennan Scott, he had 10 TFL and 4 sacks at outside linebacker. UNLV, it's just going to be another regular year for them. They might compete in a game or two. They play in a nice stadium, so if you ever want to check out that Raiders Stadium, then go ahead and check it out when UNLV plays late in the night. But this is not a team that's really going to be able to compete, I don't think. They don't get much back, and they've just been one of the worst teams in college football the last couple of years. Hawaii, though, is going to anchor the bottom of the division. Timmy Chang replaces Todd Grantham after everyone already left. 20-plus guys transferred out, 21 to be specific since November. 4 guys are back on offense, 3 of them are on the offensive line, which was a terrible unit for them. Joey Yellen, Cam Cooper, 2 Power 5 quarterback transfers will battle with Braden Schrager for the starting job. We'll see what happens there. Some promise with Cooper and Yellen, though. Derek Parsons, 6'18", and 8 scores on the ground. He's the only returner that did anything in the ground game last year for them. Zion Bowens, lead returning wide receiver, 12 grabs and 257 yards. That's a good yard per catch average, but what basically it's saying is there's not much production coming back. 28.8 points per game. It's not a terrific mark to begin with, and they're going to drop off immensely with the scheme change and the production losses. So this is going to be a tough year for this offense. Defense, even worse, though. Only 1 starter is back on a unit that allowed 31 points per game. Top 2 players on last year's unit transferred to the Pac-12 schools. The star linebacker went to UCLA. Corey Bethley went to Arizona State. So they go to the Pac-12. Linebacker Penny Pavai, 47 tackles. He's the lone returner. 7 transfers arrived, though, but overall depth and talent is scarce. It's going to be a tough year for Hawaii. Have them anchoring the bottom of this division. We'll see what Timmy Chang long-term. I think it's the right fit, but overall this team's really going to be in some trouble, and they do play Vanderbilt at home week 1. My conference championship prediction here in this conference, Fresno State over Air Force. I think they'll get the job done. Jake Haener will lead them to glory. Air Force, though, love to see Troy Calhoun raise the trophy at the end of the season. We'll see what happens rooting for those guys. Offensive player of the year, like I said, Jake Haener, I think he's going to lead the way. Defensive player of the year, Jonah Tavai from San Diego State had some great numbers off the edge for them last year. I think he's going to be very explosive and productive now that Thomas is gone. He takes on a new role, and I think he's going to do it swell. He's going to do it with ease. I think Tavai is going to have a really good season. He'll win Conference Player of the Year on the defensive side of the ball. Braxton Burmeister, San Diego State, they're obviously going to be second in my predictions in the division. I think he'll be newcomer of the year. I think he's going to add a different element to this offense that I have not had in a while. He can make plays with his legs. Has a pretty solid arm, too. When he steps into it and launches it downfield, he can get it down there. I think him and Jesse Matthews will have some big-time work this season. And then Justin McGriff, I think he'll be the biggest breakout star for Utah State because they don't return a lot of production, and that passing attack is the catalyst of that entire football team. And Bonner, he's way too good not to put it on you. So McGriff, he's going to have a big breakout year. Overall, I think this is going to be a fun season here in the Mountain West. Definitely going to watch these games late at night, or if you catch one on a Friday night or something, I think it's definitely worth tuning in. Even games like Colorado State versus Wyoming will be fun because I think the top 4 in that Mountain Division are pretty solid. Not so much in the other division, but it's still going to be competitive. I think there's 2 teams in Fresno and San Diego State that'll have a nice little battle to watch all year long. So fun conference overall. It's going to be it for today's episode, guys. Make sure you like, comment, subscribe. See you next time.